Hello everyone! In this lesson I will show how to create a custom switch, as displayed here. As you can see, it is a basic two-state switch with the circle slider. By default is in the off mode and displayed on the red background with the off label, and when a user clicks on it, it moves to on state with the green background and the on label. By default the switch is off. Despite that there are a lot of libraries, a lot of UI libraries that has such switches included, today we will create it from scratch using only HTML, CSS and JavaScript. This way you will learn how each code in this implementation works, and it will give you a power to build more advanced and complex widgets based on switch that we will create today. So let's start coding. I will start with a simple HTML page. Let's call it switch, and I will enable the preview to see what we will do. And now let's start to build a switch component. Basically it will be just a div with a switch class. The switch will contain a slider, which is also a div with a slider class, and it will have a label which will be off. By default the switch is off, and basically this is the all HTML that you should have to build a switch in the default mode. Now let's start styling it, and I will create a style sheet. Append the style sheet to the index, and add a selector for the switch. By default the switch is off, so it will be on a red background. Let's make it 100 pixels long, and the height will be 30 pixels, for example. The switch should have rounded corners, so the border radius will be also 30 pixels. Now let's align the label inside the switch to make it centered. I use flexbox to align items inside parents, so display flex. And now if I set both justify content and align items to the center, then it will be properly aligned both vertically and horizontally. Now let's design a label. To make it more convenient, I will also set a class for the label. Let it be off label. And now let's add a selector for this CSS property. But if you remember what is CSS, the CSS is cascade style sheets So it's a good practice to use the cascade features of the CSS. So the switch off label. It means that we selected the off label located inside the switch, but not just off label anywhere else. So the label will be white and the font family will be Arial. Great. Now let's build a slider inside switch. The slider will be white circle. To make a circle from a div, we should set the border radius to 100%. And to make it look like real circle, this div should have equal width and height. Let's make it 30 pixels. 30 pixels. Now we have a slider inside the switch that located near the label, on the same level with it. But we need the slider to be above the switch, not on the same level, because it should roll from left to right, from right to left, or in other words, we should have an ability to set any position of the slider above the switch, above this label, for example. So to be able to set any custom position for the element, we should set position of this element to the absolute. And now with absolute position we can use such properties as left, right, top and bottom to manually set any position regardless of how other components align it inside the container. So set, for example, left 1 pixel, but it's still not what we want. This is because by default the item that has the absolute position calculates the position relative to the whole page, but we need to calculate the position relative to the parent of this item, relative to the switch. And to make it possible, we need to set a position to the parent component too, and we need to set this position to be relative. And now it's calculated as 1 pixel relatively to the parent. So if the parent has the relative position and if the child has the absolute position, the child aligned absolutely but relative to the parent. Yes, regardless of how it sounds. And now it works as expected, like 10 pixels, 20 pixels, or you can set right 1 pixel and it still will be aligned inside the parent. In the default mode, the switch should be on the left. And I will make size a little bit smaller to make the slider to fit inside the switch. So this is how the default switch should look. Now it's time to add the on mode, and it will work the following way. If the switch component will have the on class, then it will be displayed as on. Otherwise, it will be displayed as now, as off. Let's do this. If the component with the switch class, in other words, will also have the on class, then the background color will be green. Next, if the component with the switch class also has the on class, then the slider inside this component should move to the right. But let's play a little bit to understand where exactly. 10 pixels, 20 pixels, 30 pixels, 40 pixels, 50 pixels, 60 pixels, 70 pixels, 71. Great. And finally, let's change the label. I think it's too tricky to change the text inside label using CSS. It's easier to just replace one label to another. For this, let's add one more label. Let's make it on. And now, depending on whether the switch has the on class, we will display either off label or on label. Let's start with the beginning. First, let's replace here the off label to span, because before we has a style only for single label, but now we have two, so let's style both of them equally. And now, if the switch is in the default mode, then the off label should be visible, but the on label should be hidden. Great. Now let's do the opposite for the switch when it's in the on mode. If switch is on, then the off label is hidden, and when switch is on again, then the on label is visible. Fine. Let's check how everything works. If switch is off and if switch is on. Now let's make it react to click events. So if user clicks on the switch, the event handler that we will add should toggle the on class on it. But first, let's show to the user that this item is clickable. Now it's not clear. To do this, I add a cursor pointer. Now user will see that it's possible to click on this switch. Now it's time to add some JavaScript, which I create in a separate file. And we need to add the click event handler for the div with the class switch. And this event handler should toggle the on class on this element. So document query selector switch. This is to select this div, and then add event listener click event. And when the user clicks on this switch, the click event triggered, then it's intercepted by this listener, and the object of this event passed to the event handling function. And the actual element on which the user clicked will be in the target property of the event object. So the switch is here, and we need to toggle the on class. This can be done using the class list property. Toggle on. And that's all that basically should be done to make it working. Click. Oops, I forgot the main thing. I forgot to add a script to HTML page. Edit. Now checking. Works. Fine. Almost fine, because it actually has a bug. If you click here, then it works. But if you click here or here, it doesn't work. This is because you click not on the switch, but on the slider or on the label. And in the way how event subsystem works, the event and this listener still triggered, but the target, which is sent to the event, not a switch, but either slider or span, and it doesn't work as expected. This is a very common problem that you will have or had working with click events, and there is a simple solution for this problem exists. There is the CSS property, call it pointer events, and using it you can make any element transparent, invisible for mouse clicks and other events. So for example, if I set for the slider pointer events known, then the slider becomes transparent, invisible for mouse, and when you click on it, it doesn't react to this click as a slider, but it just forwards this event to the parent, to the switch. This is exactly what we need. Click, 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 click. Let's do the same for the labels, because now it doesn't work. It tries to toggle on the on class on the label. Pointer events, no. Now everything works as expected. So, but it just jumps from left to the right, but we need to make it rolling using animation rolling from left to right during some period of time. So we should add the animation for the slider element, or to be more concrete, we need to add the animation to the left property of the slider to change the left property from 1 pixel to 71 pixel. So I know at least 3 ways to add the animation to the element, either using JavaScript or CSS, and depending on complexity I can choose one or another. In this case, this animation is very simple and it can be implemented in a single line of code. There is a transition property that runs animations in the moment when CSS properties of the element change, either all CSS property or specified. So let's make to run the transition well when all properties change, and the duration of animation will be half of a second. And just with this single line of code it magically works. So how it works? If the element has the transition enabled, then in a moment when some CSS property of the element change, it animates this change from old position to new, from old value to new value. So in this case, when you add the on class to the switch, it changes the left property of the slider, and because the slider has the transition for all properties including left, it runs the animation of the left property from left 1 pixel to left 71 pixel, and animation runs during half of a second. This way you can animate any number of numeric properties at the same time. For example, let's additionally animate the background color to, for example, don't know, light gray. And now you see that both left and background color animates when the class changes. You can control the duration of animation, make it slower or faster. Of course, if you need more control over animations, the transition is not suitable and you need to use either keyframes animation or JavaScript, but I think maybe in a half of simple animations that you see on the websites can be implemented using transitions. So now we have a complete basic switch implementation that you can use to build more complex and advanced widgets in your own projects. For example, I will show some examples of what you can do. This, in addition to these basic switches, this switch is the same as this, but it has different styling and different kind of labels. It has images as the labels, not text, but in everything else it's the same switch. You can go more and do something like this. Can you realize that what you see now is the same switch as we done today? Curious how you can do this? Well, I will show you, but on the next video. So don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because this and next and all other lessons I will put to this channel. So just subscribe to not miss anything from me. But for today, that's all. Thanks for watching. Have a fun coding and never stop learning. Goodbye.